Stop scrolling. Yeah, you. If you're hearing this, you're already in the right place. This isn't just a podcast, it's an experience. And the deeper you listen, the harder it is to pull yourself out. So don't skip. Don't pause. Just listen.
I want you to picture a scenario. And it's a situation that I think almost everyone listening to this has experienced at least once, or like probably dozens of times throughout your life.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right. So you are walking home alone, and it is late.
Like really late.
Exactly. Not just like evening late, but that specific deep night late where the world just feels, I don't know, completely hollowed out.
Like the city is just empty.
Yeah. The distant traffic is entirely faded away.
Yeah.
There are no sirens echoing off the concrete anywhere. No dogs barking in the distance. No faint blue televisions glowing behind people's living room curtains.
Just total isolation.
Right. The only sound in the entire world is the heavy, singular, buzzing hum of the street lamp right above you. And, maybe the rhythmic scuff of your own shoes against the pavement.
It's a very specific kind of urban solitude.
It really is. You are completely isolated in the calm of the night, wrapped in that silence. You're safe. You're just tired,
Just trying to get home.
Exactly. And then, cutting cleanly through that perfect undisturbed silence, a voice gives you a quiet, flat instruction. It just says, turn around.
Which is just, it's the ultimate mundane trap.
A mundane trap.
Yeah, because in that fraction of a second, right before you even have a chance to consciously process what you've just heard, your brain is already forced to reconcile this impossible contradiction.
And that exact terrifying contradiction is actually the foundation of our deep dive today.
It really sets the stage for everything.
It does. We are looking at a phenomenon that was documented in a video transcript from a YouTube channel called The Midnight Curator. And the case file, or like the narrative, is titled, It Told Me to Turn Around. So I did.
Such a great title.
Right. Now, on the surface, this presents itself as just a simple first-person horror story, like a late-night creepypasta type of thing.
Which there are thousands of online.
Exactly. But as you dig into the mechanics of what is actually happening in this specific text, you realize it is outlining a highly specific, rule-based psychological anomaly.
Yeah, it's not just a ghost story.
No, it's a reality-bending phenomenon disguised as an internet narrative.
And I would add a highly infectious one.
Ooh, yeah.
Because it operates as both a documentation of a terrifying event and, quite literally, the mechanism of the event itself.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
So our mission today for this deep dive is to track this victim's journey. We're going to follow them from that very first isolated moment under the street lamp all the way down into this state of shared public paranoia.
We really need to decode the actual physical mechanics of this entity, too.
Right, like how does it actually work? What are the physical rules governing its ability to warp space?
Because it does have rules.
It does. And perhaps most importantly for you listening right now, we're going to understand why the simple act of listening to this deep dive, like just the act of processing the information we are about to give you, might actually mean that your own immediate surroundings are already compromised.
Which is a very unsettling thought.
It is. Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start at that exact moment of the first encounter, the quiet night, the flat instruction.
Right. The initial instruction is what sets the entire architecture of this anomaly into motion.
Okay.
And to understand why it is so instantly effective, we really have to look at how it defies our fundamental biological understanding of acoustics.
Oh, like spatial awareness.
Exactly. The sound of the voice is localized entirely within the mind, right? Yet it carries the specific weight, the timbre, and the cadence of an external speaker.
So it's like a foreign presence occupying a familiar space. But what does that actually mean from a neurological perspective? Because, if I hear a voice in my head, I usually just assume it's my own internal monologue.
Sure, but think about the mechanics of human hearing. When someone speaks to you in a room, the sound waves enter your ear canal, hit your eardrum, and your brain immediately triangulates that data.
Like GPS for sound.
Right. You instantly know if the person is 3 feet behind your left shoulder or if they're shouting from a balcony across the street.
Because of how the sound hits your ears.
Yes. Conversely, when you think a thought, it has no spatial origin.
Right, doesn't travel through the air.
No, it is just present in the center of your consciousness. So this anomaly aggressively violates that boundary.
Oh, I see.
The victim hears the voice inside their own head, so it completely bypasses the physical ear canal, but it possesses the complex acoustic signature of distance, direction, and physical mass.
That is so creepy.
It sounds exactly like a human being standing maybe 36 inches right behind them, literally displacing the physical air, but the sound is perfectly, impossibly enclosed within the victim's skull.
So your brain is just being flooded with completely conflicting telemetry.
Total sensory contradiction.
Your spatial processing center is screaming, hey, there's a physical mass standing right behind us. But then your auditory processing center is reporting, no sound waves entered the physical ear. This originated internally.
And that paradox, that exact conflict, induces an immediate visceral paralysis.
You just freeze.
You have to. There are no approaching footsteps leading up to this moment. There's no rustling of clothing, no shifting shadows, just the sudden, impossible presence of a voice.
Out of nowhere.
But, you know, the spatial paradox isn't even the most disturbing part of the initial encounter.
Really? What is?
It is the tone of the voice itself.
Oh, right. The text says the tone is neutral and calm.
Completely flat.
It carries absolute zero threat. It feels like a professional instruction.
Yes.
And ironically, that lack of threat is somehow the most bone-chilling aspect of the entire encounter.
It's the horror of the passive approach.
What do you mean by passive approach?
Well, if you are walking down a dark alley and something growls behind you, or you hear heavy footsteps suddenly sprinting toward you, your biological hardwiring immediately takes over.
Fight or flight.
Exactly. The amygdala fires. You are immediately prepared to fight or flee a predator.
Adrenaline dumps into your system.
Right. But a calm, neutral, professional tone bypasses that threat detection system entirely.
Because it doesn't sound dangerous.
Right. It doesn't register as a predator in the wild. It registers as a bureaucratic protocol.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense. It's an invitation. It is an invitation just waiting to see if it will be accepted. Like, it's not saying, I am going to hunt you down and hurt you. It is just presenting a simple directive. Turn around.
It puts the burden of action entirely on the victim.
Right. It places the agency, and therefore the psychological weight of what happens next, squarely on the person experiencing it.
You have to make the choice.
So the body naturally freezes. And the text says there is a sudden weight to the air, like a localized pressure drop.
A physical heaviness.
Yeah, a sense of a deliberate presence holding perfectly still in the dark, just waiting for any sign of a reaction. The entity, whatever this thing is extraordinarily patient.
Which makes it so much worse.
Let's talk about the victim's immediate reaction after that freeze, though, because I feel like this might be the most universally human moment in the entire scenario.
Oh, the rationalization.
Yes, they freeze, they feel that impossible weight in the air. The voice repeats the command, and then the victim just lets out a nervous laugh.
The nervous laugh is such a fragile, desperate defense mechanism.
It really is. It's the brain desperately trying to rationalize the terror. It immediately starts searching for a logical, non-threatening explanation for what just happened.
Anything to make it normal.
Right. They're like, oh, I'm just working too hard. I'm exhausted. And that was just a random misfiring of a tired brain.
I'm having a microsleep hallucination.
Exactly.
We have an immense, almost pathological capacity for denial when we are confronted with something that shatters our paradigm.
We really do.
The human brain craves order and predictability above all else. So when an anomaly occurs, something that demonstrably breaks the laws of physics or reality, the cognitive dissonance is so severe that the mind will construct almost any fiction to force the event back into a box of normalcy.
Just to cope.
Right. Believing you are suffering from acute sleep deprivation or an auditory hallucination is infinitely preferable to believing that a reality-altering entity is currently occupying the geometric space right behind your spine.
Oh, man. It reminds me of this thing like, imagine you're driving down a deserted highway in the middle of the night. Suddenly, your car engine makes this horrible, grinding, metallic clunking sound. A sound that instinctively tells you, oh no, something is catastrophically wrong with the transmission.
A sound no driver ever wants to hear.
Exactly. But what do most people actually do in that split second?
They definitely don't panic immediately.
No, they don't immediately pull over to the shoulder and prepare for a total disaster. They grimace. They wait a single second to see if the car literally explodes, and when it doesn't, they just reach over and turn the radio up a little louder.
You literally drown out the anomaly.
Right. You tell yourself, it was probably just a rock hitting the undercarriage. It's fine.
It's nothing.
I'm just going to keep driving and act like it didn't happen. Because dealing with a blown engine in the pitch black is just too overwhelming to process right now.
That is a perfect analogy for what the victim does here.
So in this scenario, the victim hears the impossible voice, lets out that nervous laugh, turns the metaphorical radio up, and just takes 3 more steps forward, attempting to literally walk away from the impossibility.
Which raises a really important question.
Yeah.
Why does the entity operate this way? Why does it wait for the victim to dismiss the voice, to rationalize it, to take those 3 specific steps away before it actually springs the trap?
Yeah, that's a good point. If it has the ability to warp reality, why play this waiting game? Why not just get right to it?
Because the entity weaponizes false security.
Okay, unpack that.
Think about the emotional trajectory of the victim in those few seconds. First, there is the shock of the voice,
Right.
the freeze, the massive spike of primal fear.
Right, the heart rate spikes.
But then comes the rationalization, the nervous laugh, the self-soothing thought of, I am just tired.
The calming down phase.
Yes.
Right.
In the exact moment the victim takes those 3 subsequent steps forward, what is happening chemically in their brain?
Oh, they're relaxing.
Their heart rate is beginning to slow down. They are exhaling. They are actively convincing themselves that the threat does not actually exist.
They're lowering their shield.
Yeah.
They are actively leaning into the illusion of safety. It's almost like they are participating in their own deception.
And it is precisely at the apex of that relief, the very moment when the victim is most vulnerable because they have consciously decided they are safe, that the entity pulls the rug out from under them.
Wow.
By letting the victim assume it's just fatigue, the inevitable manipulation of reality becomes exponentially more jarring.
Because it comes out of nowhere again.
Right. It completely shatters the false safety the victim just spent energy building, leaving them with absolutely no psychological defenses left.
Which brings us to the trigger. The sequence of events is incredibly precise here. The victim dismisses the voice, they take 3 more steps, and then the mechanism is triggered. The environment begins to desync.
Desynchronization.
Yeah.
We usually apply that term to audio and video feeds, like when a movie's lip sync is off. But applying it to physical reality is a profoundly disturbing concept.
Because it implies reality is what? A program.
It implies that reality isn't a solid, immutable state, but rather a rendered process.
Like a simulation struggling to keep up. Let's walk through the specific sensory breakdown here, because it happens in a very deliberate, terrifying cascade. The very first thing that happens after those 3 steps is a subtle but really catastrophic violation of physics. A footstep echoes late.
Of all the mechanics in this scenario, the late footstep might actually be the most quietly horrifying detail.
It really is, because it completely breaks the fundamental law of cause and effect. You put your foot down on the pavement, you physically feel the impact traveling up your leg.
Because vibration is there.
But the sound just doesn't happen.
Right.
And then maybe half a second later or a full second later, the scuff finally reaches your ears.
It is the severance of action from consequence. In our everyday lives, reality is so tightly woven. Action and reaction are instantaneous and completely inseparable.
You drop a glass, it breaks and makes a sound immediately.
Exactly. If that synchronization slips even by half a second, it implies that reality is struggling to render the environment around you. It suggests that the local laws of physics are suddenly experiencing bandwidth issues.
Like a video game lagging because the processor is overloaded.
That's exactly what it feels like.
But this is the real world.
Mm-hmm.
Your own brain is trying to sync the physical sensation of your foot hitting the ground with the auditory feedback, and there's a gap, a literal gap in reality.
It's nauseating.
And that late footstep is just the beginning of the cascade. Next, the overhead streetlights pulse in a rapid sequence, failing one by one until the street is completely dark.
The visual anchor is removed. The boundaries of the physical space are essentially erased.
Right, you can't see the edges of the world anymore. And then a sudden total silence follows. The wind dies. The ambient hum of the city, that heavy singular hum of the street lamp we talked about in the very beginning, it vanishes completely. The world hits a total suffocating pause.
It creates a total sensory vacuum.
I really want to focus on this moment of absolute silence, because the psychological weight of this is staggering to me.
It's hard to even imagine.
Imagine standing in that space. The lights are gone. The hum of the city is gone. The wind is gone. You are in total sensory deprivation, standing on an open sidewalk. How do you even begin to test if reality is still stable?
You really can't.
Because if cause and effect are broken, How do you calibrate your own senses?
You are stripped of all external feedback. If you are standing in an anechoic chamber, one of those rooms designed to completely absorb sound.
Oh yeah, the ones where people go crazy after an hour.
Right. Within minutes in one of those, you will start to hear the blood pumping through your own veins. Your brain, starved of input, will actually start generating auditory hallucinations just to fill the void.
Because it hates the silence.
Exactly. But this isn't an artificial room. This is an open city street that has suddenly, impossibly muted itself.
Right. So as a thought experiment, what would you even do in that moment? Like, do you reach into your pocket and drop your keys on the ground to see if they make a sound?
Well, dropping the keys assumes gravity is still functioning normally.
Ooh, that's exactly the terror. If your footstep echoed late, maybe the keys won't make a sound at all. Or maybe they will sound like shattering glass.
Or maybe they won't fall down at all.
Right, maybe they'll just hang in the air or fall up. You can't trust gravity. You can't trust acoustics. When the hum of the city vanishes, all you have left is the physical pressure of the atmosphere against your skin.
That's the only anchor left.
You are reduced to the most primal, basic level of sensory input just to confirm you still exist. You were just standing there waiting to feel the weight of the air.
And this total sensory deprivation serves a very specific mechanical purpose for the entity.
What's the purpose?
By removing all external stimuli, the lights, the wind, the city hum, the entity creates a blank canvas.
To clear the board.
Exactly. It isolates the victim's consciousness entirely. There are no distractions. There is nowhere for the mind to wander. The stage is set, completely empty and perfectly silent for the main event.
And out of that suffocating quiet, the command repeats. Turn around.
But this time, it is not an invitation. It is an inevitability. The environment has been cleared. The victim's focus is completely singular.
The rationalization is gone. That false security we talked about is shattered. The victim's body reacts instinctively. Slowly, they turn.
They have no other choice.
And this brings us to the visual distortion. They turn around, and the street behind them is empty, but the dimensions are entirely wrong.
Spatial degradation.
Yeah.
The rendering engine of reality has completely failed at this point.
The road stretches into an impossible length, and the darkness feels, as the text says, physically occupied. Not just an absence of light, but full, thick.
When the environment stretches to an impossible length, we are looking at a failure of Euclidean geometry.
Like parallel lines meeting.
Right. Parallel lines are no longer behaving as they should. Depth perception is being actively manipulated. It is as if the physical space itself is being stretched and warped like taffy.
Just pulled out of shape.
And that concept of physically occupied darkness, it implies that the absence of light has actually gained mass and volume. It is crowding in on the victim. It is a literal presence.
It's not just a hallucination, though. This is a mechanical reaction. The environment is actually changing, which naturally begs the question of how this entity powers these impossible changes.
That's the real mystery.
Because this is where the actual physics of the anomaly come into play, right?
Yes, and the mechanics of this anomaly are fascinating because they completely subvert our traditional understanding of supernatural events.
How so?
Well, usually we imagine a haunting or a poltergeist possessing its own inherent terrifying power. A ghost throws a chair across a room using its own unseen kinetic energy.
Right, the ghost does the pushing.
Exactly. But this phenomenon reveals a profoundly different dynamic. The prompt, the command to turn around, was actually just a tool.
A tool.
It was a lever pulled to rewrite the surrounding physics.
Wait, meaning the voice itself didn't change the street. The voice didn't make the road stretch or the darkness feel heavy.
Exactly. The entity lacks its own kinetic power.
Really?
It possesses zero ability to physically alter the real world on its own. It is entirely impotent in a vacuum.
Wait, hold on. If the entity has literally zero power, then the victim isn't actually a victim, right?
Right. The entity is a parasite, a purely parasitic energy source. It relies entirely 100% on the victim's own movements and the victim's own attention to dismantle reality piece by piece.
Oh man, here's where it gets really interesting. If every change in the environment is powered by the person's own movement, then they are the ones doing the damage.
Yes.
That completely changes how we should look at this whole story. They are an active collaborator in their own localized apocalypse. By obeying the command, by physically turning around, they are the ones literally pushing the geometry of the street out of alignment.
The victim is the engine.
The engine, wow.
The entity provides the blueprint, but the victim provides the manual labor of destruction.
It's like a puppet master who doesn't have any strings of their own.
That's a great way to put it.
They don't have the materials. Instead, they stand in the dark, they whisper a suggestion to you, and you're the one who picks up the strings, ties them to your own limbs, hands the other end to the entity in the dark, and says, okay, pull.
It is a dark collaboration entirely predicated on compliance. The physical act of turning the body, of rotating the shoulders, of shifting the gaze, that kinetic energy is harvested by the entity and used to torque the physical space. Your compliance is the fuel.
But there's a counterbalance to this, right? A way out.
Yeah.
A reset mechanism.
There appears to be.
If you just look back forward, the streetlights snap back on. The sound of the city returns. The world normalizes. The lag disappears. The desync is fixed. It seems almost too easy. You just look away and the nightmare ends.
But the world only appears normal again, and that is the trap. Each act of compliance serves as a point of calibration.
A point of calibration. Let's break that down. How does looking back over your shoulder calibrate a reality warping entity?
Think of reality as a highly complex, tightly wound lock on a safe.
Okay, a safe.
When you turn around in response to the voice, you are essentially letting a thief turn the dial, listening for the tumblers to click into place. You're introducing a foreign gear into that clockwork.
So you're giving it a chance to learn the lock.
Right. The environment deviates. When you look back forward, the dial stops. The clock snaps back to its normal rhythm. The lights turn on, the sound returns. But the structural integrity of the lock has been fundamentally compromised.
Because it knows a little bit more about how to open it now.
Exactly. The baseline of what is normal has shifted slightly. You have calibrated the entity to your specific physical reality. You have shown it exactly how your local physics work, and you have demonstrated that your consciousness is willing to interact with it. The dark shade has begun to eclipse the baseline.
You prove to it that your reality can be manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
You let it pick the first pin in the lock, you open the door a crack, and even though you slammed it shut when you looked forward again, the hinge is weakened.
And because the hinge is weakened, the anomaly can escalate.
Which is exactly what happens in the narrative. The anomaly doesn't just disappear after that first night. The next night and the night after, it returns.
It found its target.
It has attached itself to that calibration point.
Yeah.
And the instructions it gives become far more specific and, honestly, far more invasive.
It moves from a general spatial command turnaround to highly targeted micro commands.
Like, stop walking, look at the window, don't blink.
Don't blink is particularly insidious.
Why is that one worse?
It forces a conscious override of an involuntary biological function. It demands total, unwavering visual engagement.
It's demanding a complete monopoly on your attention.
Yes.
And this is a major focus point for us today, this idea of attention as a catalyst. We established that thermal movement powered the initial shift on the street.
The kinetic transfer.
Right. But as this escalates night after night, it becomes clear that it isn't just about moving your body anymore. The text says sustained compliance causes a steady degradation of space. It's about mental focus.
In the ecosystem of this anomaly, mental focus is the truest form of kinetic energy.
Right, because if you are standing completely still in your apartment, desperately trying not to blink, staring at a window because the voice told you to, your body isn't moving.
There's no physical movement at all.
There's no physical kinetic energy being transferred. But your attention is entirely locked onto the entity's rules, and that intense mental focus is what allows the familiar room to become completely unrecognizable.
This is where we see the transition from physical manipulation to psychological consumption. Attention is the currency of consciousness.
Okay, explain that a bit more.
Well, in quantum mechanics, there is a concept where the act of observation actually collapses the wave function. Reality only settles into a definitive state when it is being observed.
Schrodinger's cat kind of stuff.
Exactly. This anomaly uses a dark inversion of that exact principle. Your observation doesn't collapse reality into a stable state. It actively unwrites the stable state.
Oh, wow.
By demanding your attention through these specific commands, it forces you to withdraw your cognitive energy from maintaining the normal world and redirect it entirely into the anomalous world. You literally stop rendering your apartment and you start rendering the horror.
It is the ultimate psychological horror of losing control. I mean, it is one thing to be trapped in a haunted house where the walls are bleeding on their own.
Sure, that's external.
It is entirely another thing to realize that your own senses, Your own ability to focus, your own consciousness, are the exact tools being weaponized against you to make the walls bleed.
You are building your own prison, brick by brick, just by looking at the mortar.
The more you pay attention to the rules of your changing environment, the faster those rules dissolve. If you obsess over the fact that the shadow in the corner is growing, your obsession is the fuel that makes it grow.
It's a feedback loop.
If you hyperfixate on the fact that the hallway looks too long, your fixation is what stretches the floorboards.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this maps perfectly onto very real-world human anxieties about losing one's mind.
Oh, totally.
The terror in this scenario isn't a monster with claws chasing you down a dark street. The terror is the architecture of reality betraying you, simply because you paid too much attention to a stray thought. It perfectly captures the spiral of an intrusive thought.
Yes, you have a weird, dark thought, and instead of letting it pass like a cloud, you focus on it. You turn it over in your mind. You analyze it.
Give it weight.
And suddenly, that thought expands until it colors your entire perception of reality. It becomes the only real thing left in the world. The entity is basically the physical manifestation of a localized, solitary descent into madness.
Localized and solitary. That's key here. Up until this point, the entire experience has been strictly isolated.
It's just the victim.
It happens late at night. It happens when the victim is completely alone. The degradation of space is private. It is contained within the bubble of a single consciousness interacting with the entity.
But if this is just happening in your own mind, if it relies on a quiet, isolated environment to trick your senses, what happens when you take those environmental advantages away? Like, does the entity just lose its power in broad daylight?
That is the assumption. It's a logical defense mechanism. Let me just surround myself with normal stuff.
Right, stay in the light, stay around people. But the anomaly adapts, and it breaks that isolation in the most terrifying way possible. Yeah. We move from the solitary bedroom to the plaza incident.
The shift in setting is critical. From a dark, isolated street at night to a crowded, noisy plaza in the middle of the day.
It's the starkest contrast imaginable. Broad daylight, dozens, maybe hundreds of people walking around, conversations, footsteps, birds, city traffic in the distance.
Total sensory overload in a good way.
The ultimate safe space. The victim is surrounded by the overwhelming proof of objective, shared reality. You can't desync a plaza full of 100 people, right?
And yet, the internal command cuts precisely through the daytime noise.
It still gets in.
The voice returns. Turn around.
It's still localized in the mind, but now it's competing with the roar of a crowd. And in this moment, the victim makes a choice. A profound choice based on the escalation they've experienced over the last few nights. They choose to remain perfectly still.
They refuse the prompt.
Right. They are trying to stop the kinetic transfer, trying to deny the entity the calibration it wants. They are trying to starve it of attention.
It is a calculated act of resistance. If compliance causes degradation, then non-compliance should theoretically stabilize reality.
But they are completely blindsided by what happens next. The victim remains still. But across the plaza, maybe 50 feet away, entirely unconnected to the victim, a stranger in the crowd stops walking.
And this stranger sharply snaps their head backward.
Unnatural synchronization.
Unnatural synchronization with the exact command the victim just heard in their own head.
This is the moment the paradigm completely shatters.
Everything we thought we knew about the rules is wrong.
It's the realization of shared paranoia. The victim and the stranger, across the crowded daytime plaza, they lock eyes. Their expressions of confusion and terror are completely identical.
They recognize the fear.
In that one fraction of a second, staring across the concrete, surrounded by completely oblivious people, they both realize they are hearing the exact same internal voice.
A new, much more terrifying rule has been revealed here.
How does this even work? How does a localized hallucination suddenly infect a random person 50 feet away? What does the stranger's reaction signify about the mechanics of this entity?
It signifies that the anomaly is a shared experience. It is not tethered to one specific geographical location, and it is not tethered exclusively to one specific victim's mind. It has the ability to jump.
Jump from person to person.
And the mechanism by which it jumps is profoundly disturbing. It jumps between strangers through nothing more than a moment of common attention.
A moment of common attention. Wait, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this.
Yeah.
The victim hears the voice and focuses on it, deciding not to turn around. The stranger across the plaza hears the voice, focuses on it, and does turn around. Their mutual focus on the anomaly creates a bridge.
Yes. The entity operates on a bandwidth of awareness.
It's like a virus.
Very much so.
But a biological virus spreads through physical proximity. A sneeze, touching a contaminated surface, whatever. You have to be physically near the infected person. But this entity doesn't care about physical proximity at all.
Space means nothing to it.
It spreads through a shared frequency of awareness. If two people, no matter where they are, tune into the exact same radio station, if they both focus their cognitive energy on the existence of the entity can travel between them. It uses the signal of their attention as a literal conduit.
And that shared frequency is what makes the Plaza incident so devastating. The victim thought they were fighting a lonely battle for their own sanity.
That it was all in their head.
But locking eyes with that stranger proves that the madness is objective. The infection is real, it is spreading, and worst of all, any attempt to pay attention to it only connects you to other infected nodes in the network.
Wow.
Every time you perceive it, you become a broadcasting tower for it.
Which means the scope of this is horrifying. If it can jump across a plaza just because two people notice the same silence, where does it stop?
It doesn't stop. Because if the entity spreads through a shared frequency of awareness, if it travels along the conduit of common attention, then we have to look at what we're doing right now.
Ah, the ultimate fourth wall break. The focus suddenly shifts away from the victim, away from the stranger in the plaza, away from the narrative entirely, and directly onto you, the listener.
By tracking the victim's journey, by theorizing on the mechanics of the desync, by understanding how the entity harvests kinetic energy and demands attention, you, the listener, have inadvertently tuned your cognitive radio to its exact frequency.
You thought you were just safely listening to a deep dive about a weird internet story. You thought you were safely separated by a screen, by your headphones, by distance, by time. But the rule we just established is absolute. The entity spreads through awareness.
You are now participating in a moment of common attention with us. The knowledge itself is the infection.
This is the paradox of vulnerability through understanding.
It's just a cruel trick.
In almost every horror scenario, or indeed in real life, knowledge is power. If you learn the rules of the monster, you know how to defeat it. If you understand the virus, you can create a vaccine. But here, the rule is inverted.
Completely backward.
The more you understand its nature, the more vulnerable you become to its gaze. Knowledge is not power. Knowledge is an invitation.
By comprehending the mechanics of the anomaly, by understanding the late footstep, the sensory vacuum, the calibration of reality, you have constructed the exact mental scaffolding the entity needs to manifest in your reality.
You built the bridge yourself.
You have provided it with a map of your own cognitive processes. You have built the lock it wants to pick.
And we're not just talking in abstracts here. The entity requires a blank canvas to operate. It needs you to notice the space you are currently occupying.
So as you are listening to this, look away from your screen. Look at the corners of the room you are in.
Notice the ambient silence sitting in those corners. Is there a faint hum from an appliance? A refrigerator in the kitchen? A street lamp outside your window? Pay attention to it. And more importantly, pay attention to what it feels like if that hum were to suddenly stop.
Notice how your body is positioned right now.
Pay attention to how heavy the physical air feels against your skin when you stay perfectly still.
It is forcing you to artificially recreate the sensory deprivation of the initial desync. It is making you hyper-aware of your own physical space and your own physical stillness. It is preparing the canvas.
You're calibrating.
What's fascinating here is how masterfully this phenomenon turns the very act of media consumption into the catalyst for the horror.
It's brilliant, really.
We live in an era of constant information absorption. We listen to audio, we watch video essays, we consume endless streams of data, always assuming a safe, objective distance between the content and ourselves. We believe we are just observers.
Safe behind the glass.
This anomaly shatters that illusion. The line between this audio deep dive and your immediate physical reality has completely dissolved.
The entity is no longer trapped in the story of the plaza. It has used this audio as a vehicle to travel into your consciousness. And the final warning is clear. The entity is no longer asking. It is waiting for the moment you finally decide to comply.
It has established the baseline. The dark shape is waiting to eclipse it.
You are now exactly where the original victim was at the very beginning of the encounter. You have heard the information, you know the rules, your environment is primed. And now, you are simply waiting for that calm, neutral voice to echo inside your own skull and tell you, turn around.
The trap is fully set.
Let's take a breath and try to summarize this incredible descent. We started with a mundane, almost dismissible moment. A late-night acoustic anomaly that could easily be laughed off as exhaustion. But we explored how that initial denial, that weaponized false security, allowed the entity to trigger a mechanical lag in reality.
A desync powered entirely by the kinetic energy of human compliance and observation.
The victim's own movements push the geometry of their world out of alignment, and then we track the escalation, the shift from physical movement to mental focus, the terrifying realization that attention is a catalyst, and that cognitive rendering causes a steady degradation of space.
Which then culminated in the public outbreak in the plaza, revealing the anomaly as a shared mimetic virus that jumps through common awareness.
And finally, the ultimate trap, the infection of your own mind, right here, right now, simply by listening to us explain how the physics of this entity function. So what does this all mean? When we strip away the narrative, what is the core philosophical insight we should take away from this?
It forces us to confront a deeply unsettling paradox about attention and resistance.
Okay, lay it on me.
We established that the entity feeds entirely on your attention and your active compliance. It harvests your cognitive energy to warp space. So the logical response, the desperate defense mechanism, would be to try and ignore it, to try and force it out of your mind completely.
Just don't think about it.
But think about the psychological mechanics of forced ignorance. If you spend the rest of your night tonight actively forcing yourself not to think about the voice, actively forcing yourself not to turn around to check the dark corners of your room, aren't you still dedicating massive amounts of your mental energy to its existence?
Oh, wow. Ironic process theory, the white bear problem.
Exactly. If I tell you not to think of a white bear, the only way to ensure you aren't thinking of it is to constantly monitor your thoughts for the presence of the bear.
You have to think about it to make sure you aren't thinking about it.
The effort of not thinking about something requires you to focus on it by trying to lock the entity out, by focusing so hard on resisting the urge to turn around. You are providing it with the exact kinetic focus it needs.
Wow.
You are building the walls of its new home in your mind, brick by brick, with your own resistance. Is trying not to think about it just another more insidious form of calibration?
That is a terrifying thought to leave on. You are trapped whether you comply or whether you actively resist, because both require your attention. You are damned if you look and damned if you focus on not looking. Well, I want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We highly recommend checking out the Midnight Curator on YouTube if you are brave enough to risk further calibration. Good luck with the heavy air in your room tonight. If you start noticing the silence a little too much, or if you hear a calm, neutral voice, trust your instincts, turn the radio up. But whatever you do, maybe don't turn around.